So you want the secret for your shoulder pain. Sadly, there is no secret. As a physical therapist, I see people all the time who got an injury, they rested it like they thought they were supposed to do, the pain went away, and they get back to their activity, and what do you know, the pain comes back. Well, a common thing that I try to teach people is that nothing with the body happens on accident. So even though inflammation subsided, the injury theoretically healed, even someone who comes in after surgery, after 12 weeks or so, the trauma from the surgery is actually healed, but pain will often persist. And so there's a reason for that. One analogy I'll use a lot of times is baking cookies. If you need 3 eggs and you only have 2, you don't get to make cookies. So if you're wanting to run or squat or overhead press, but you don't have the fundamentals for that movement, then just simply practicing more of that movement is not going to be helpful. And kind of throwing some corrective exercises at that may or may not be helpful. And there's a reason, because if you don't have the fundamentals, you can't stack higher level movement on top of that. Let's talk about why did injury actually even happen. So at the most simple level, your body couldn't handle the load that you placed on it. So whatever tolerance your body had was less than the demands placed on it. And so something had to break down. So there's kind of 2 strategies you could take if you want to fix that. One, you could just bring your function down to a level that's below the tolerance of your body. Obviously that's not going to work, and that's the same reason why bed rest is not healthy for us. We're actually not machines. We like to use the analogy a lot that we're machines, but a machine breaks down with use, where we are actually an organism, of course. So what that means is we need stress to a point. So if we stress our bodies, not too much, but enough, then our body actually gets stronger to that. So as far as rehabbing an injury, that's kind of the big overriding principle is 1, we have to stress our bodies, and 2, not too much. So when it comes to rehab, our goal is movement efficiency. And that basically implies an ease of movement. In the rehab world, we're kind of at a crossroads where historically we've gone very localized. So if you had knee pain, it was strengthen your quad, strengthen your hamstrings, deal with what's happening at the actual knee. I think we're kind of swinging the other direction now, where we're thinking in more global movement. So if your knee hurts, we got to look at your hip and your ankle, your core, and all that's really important. But we need actually both. So whatever the tissue that actually broke down is, we need to deal with that as well. So if your knee breaks down, we need to figure out what is the structure that's actually hurting. We need to shore up all the weaknesses and deficits around the knee, but then we also need the hip and the ankle and the core, and how are all those joints integrated together to actually do something functional. So when someone comes in for rehab and they've had this knee issue for a long time, you'll find that you have lots of similar injuries. So someone might come in with a patellofemoral issue. 3 people might come in, but they all present very differently as far as the deficits that may have led to that. So someone might have a weak core, someone might actually really have a weak quad, someone else might have a super stiff ankle. So when it comes to rehabbing these things, and if you found videos online trying to give you some strategies to try and help, and they haven't, well, that's one reason, is because no 2 injuries are the same. So even though one person had success doing some hip abductions for their knee, the other person it might not help, because that's probably not their deficit. So when it comes to rehab, it's got to be a really individualized process. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to post this video, is to try and give some of those fundamentals and help you understand why kind of recipe-based sort of programs may not be best for you. I certainly wouldn't say they'll be hurtful, but if you feel like you're kind of spinning your wheels, I wanted to just give a little bit more of the fundamentals to help you understand, one, why maybe those things aren't working, just because a lot of people will come in feeling kind of broken, and that actually may not be the case. It just might be that you're not doing the things that you need to do. And then two, help people give people some fundamentals so that they don't necessarily need some sort of recipe, but that they can take the principles and be independent and be creative and come up with some of their own things to try and fix the problem. So as far as getting those fundamentals, what does that actually mean? So one of my favorite strength coaches is Louis Simmons, and I was listening to an interview and they were asking him about some of his high jumpers, I think it was. And they were asking him, well, you guys don't really do a whole lot of high jumping. And so the question that he asked was, what limits the height of a pyramid? And the answer was the width of its base. So, and I think that's a perfect analogy for the rehab process as well as the performance coaching. So what does that mean? If you look at a pyramid, you can't stack those blocks very high if you don't have a stable foundation. And so that applies in this world as well as to health. So if you think of it sort of as a hierarchy, on that very base level is kind of our fundamentals of health. So adequate sleep, good water, good food. I think it really is very simple, and those low level fundamentals of health. If we'll take care of those, even a lot of times our injuries will start to calm down a little bit, because your body can actually get in a mode to heal. If you think above that, I would call that the fundamentals of movement, and that's really where rehab sits. I'll get into this more later, but just to kind of quickly introduce it, I kind of think in three pillars. So on one hand, I'll call it like the hardware. So for all the complicated movements that we need, so think of a squat, our ankles, our knees, our hips, our trunk, even up our upper back and into our neck, have a particular position that they need to occupy that would be most efficient for that movement. So whether we're talking squatting or running, so I say the hardware has to have the freedom of movement to get there. So if the ankles are stiff, you're not going to be able to let your knees go forward, and it's going to push you back on your heels. So that might be an issue, or your hip is stiff and you can't fully get down. So for whatever the movements that you need to get into, you need the hardware having the freedom to actually be able to move there. The second piece, I call it like the software. So some people come in, their shoulder hurts and they're trying to lift their arm, they can't get it. But as soon as you lay them down on their back, they have full motion. Well, that's not a hardware issue, that's a software issue. So if your shoulder feels tight, but I can lay you on your back and you have full motion, that's not a tight shoulder. And so even though it feels tight and feels like you need to stretch it, maybe that's a software issue. So more of a neuromuscular issue. So just meaning, even though you have adequate mobility of the joints and soft tissues, your body might not have the coordination to be able to coordinate the muscles around that joint. And so your body then kind of locks it down to protect it. And so that might be a reason that stretching is not helping. It's because it's not an actual stretching issue. It might be a neuromuscular issue. And then the third pillar is motor control. So basically, I call that kind of the expression. So you have the hardware and the software that allows the hip a certain amount of motion, the knee a certain amount of motion, the ankle a certain amount of motion, and then the coordination around each of those joints. The motor control is the strength and endurance, and then putting all those together to do a particular movement. So it might be a squat, or it might be running, or whatever it might be. The motor control is the expression of that hardware and software. And so that's really what I would call the fundamentals of movement. On top of that would be kind of your strength training, your skills training, and then ultimately at the top of that pyramid would be your performance. So if you find, let's say at the top there, like you're wanting to squat, and it keeps breaking down and something keeps hurting, and you keep practicing more squats and it's not working, well, you want to go down in the fundamentals. Maybe you're not getting enough sleep. Maybe you just had a baby and life's super stressful, and so your body's just not able to recover. Well, just practicing more squats is not going to be helpful. If you have those fundamentals of health, then you would look at the next layer into those fundamentals of movement. And that's kind of where rehab really sits. And it's always really surprising to people when they've had trouble squatting for months and you give them some simple exercise or some simple little manual technique, and then they can go squat, and they're so surprised that they've kind of been spinning their wheels all this time, and actually it was just because they didn't have the fundamentals. You know, they only had 2 eggs for the cookies and they needed 3, and they were able to restore that, even just in some of these simple little exercises. Sometimes that gives them enough to get over the hump. And that's really where, when an injury is not healing, one of the big reasons is just they're not getting fundamental enough. And so that's really what I try to teach a lot of my clients, is trying to convince them that these simple, often sometimes cheesy looking exercises are going to be valuable for them to get them over the hump and actually allow their body to heal. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. I am a physical therapist based in Austin, Texas, and I love getting questions from people and interacting with people on the internet. My Instagram is ATX Physical Therapy, or I'd actually be happy to hear from you over email. My email is atxphysicaltherapy@gmail.com, and please reach out and see if I can help. I really enjoy this sort of stuff, so I'm happy to try and be a resource for you. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you'll enjoy some of the other videos I put up.